Hi, hello everyone, and welcome to our talk for AI for EU and Women in AI. Today's talk is called A Robotic New Hope, Ethical Questions in Regards to the Human-Robot Relationship. It will be given by me, Oksana Buck, on the topic of social robots then. First, a little bit of a presentation. So here's myself. I'm Oksana Buck once again. I am a doctoral candidate at the TUM School of Management, TUM for Technical University of Munich. I'm also a researcher at the Institute for Ethics and Artificial Intelligence at the Technical University of Munich. And I have the chance to be a Beyond Fellow at the TUM International AI Future Lab in the team for AI for Earth observation. My education, my background is in cyberpsychology and psychology, which basically means interaction between technology and humans. So today we're going to talk about social robots. The first thing about social robots is probably to define it. I will give you a few definitions in here, or at least the one I use, my favorite ones. But just so you know, there is quite a few out there. I just like to take the biggest one, let's say the one that will have the most robots fit into it. My definition, the one I'm using, I did not come up with it, Fox and Gambino did, is that social robots are human-made, AI-powered technology. AI, of course, means artificial intelligence, in a digital or physical form, presenting human-like attributes to some degrees. We will get a bit further into this human-like attributes thing just later on. More importantly, they are designed to communicate with people. And that's the social part of it, the part that really interests me personally, and I think interests us in general. In 2003, interestingly enough, Fong and collaborators already discussed social robots, and they had a different layer, an additional layer to the definition, which was that the main goal of social robots was to establish and maintain social relationships. So it's a bit more than simply chit-chatting with people, right? It's a bit more than simply communicate. It is about building something, really building it. How do you build a relationship now? That's a really good question. I'm going to guess that most of you do know that, because we all have relationships in our lives. The first level is to interact. Interaction can be multiple things, right? It can go as low as looking at someone and having a look back. It can be about talking to someone. It can go with touch as well. And when you multiply those interactions, when you have a back and forth of interactions, then you get into a relationship. Now, you're going to tell me you're not in a relationship with everyone you interact, and I would say you are 100% right. But to a certain point, you would fit an interaction or a different amount of interaction into the relationship category. Now, when we say relationship, we don't have to mean friendship. We don't have to mean a love relationship, romantic relationship. It can be the really simple going to see your baker every Monday. Maybe you have habits. You're going to go and see some specific people, and you don't have to be friends with them, but you do have a relationship with them, especially if those relationships are regulated in a way. For example, maybe you go to class every Monday from 8 to 10 with one teacher. And you do interact with this teacher, you do speak with this teacher. While you have a relationship, and it's not the strongest, it's not about loyalty, it's not about values really, it's there because you interact on a regular basis, or regular enough. So relationships can be defined really simply by repeated interactions. And what interests us with social robot is that if you go back to social interaction, you can see reciprocal stimulation. So you have a stimuli, right? So you're giving something. and the person or the thing in front of you will answer. The robot can do that. The robot can. It can recognize a stimulus. And a relationship is when you multiply this interaction. The robot can do that as well. A social robot can definitely be part of a, repeated interaction with the user. But the robot cannot be emotionally involved in this relationship. And I think that's where my work comes in. It's that the robot cannot feel, at least not yet, maybe in 50 years, and it's a big maybe. But right now, today, this robot cannot feel. It will create an inequitable emotional involvement, right? And this is what we call parasocial relationship. When you have a relationship with another human, you will have emotions most of the time involved, even if they're just mere small emotions, right? But you would have something, maybe joy when you see your baker. Again, love bakers. But with a robot, the robot can act like it's happy to see you. I'm happy, I'm sad to say that they're not happy. They fake happiness, which is fine. But this is now called a parasocial relationship because you might be happy to see your robot. What's interesting with those parasocial relationships is that they might not be considered real, but they are perceived as real. So me as a human, I might actually start liking a robot. And this emotional involvement, this relationship might grow over time and, interestingly enough, might persist over time. So now you're going to tell me, maybe not me personally, maybe someone else. So I'm going to use another example in which, or another context in which parasocial relationship occur, and that would be TV shows. Maybe you have a favorite TV show, and maybe you have a favorite character in that favorite TV show. And whether you want it or not, you do have a parasocial relationship with them, because if they're your favorite character, probably you have some kind of feelings towards that character. This works with a favorite book or favorite movie, especially if there's sequels to a movie. I mean, I know that I have some strong parasocial relationship with Obi-Wan Kenobi. I personally love the guy, fully fictional. I'm aware of it, but this is a parasocial relationship. I'm not going to spoil anyone. I'm not going to say what happens in the movies. But if at some point in a TV show, a book, a movie, the character that you have a liking for dies, you might even feel grief. And that's interesting. You might go through grief for a fictional character. And this shows how much those parasocial relationships are important to be taken into account, especially in the context of social robots, because now you have a tangible thing in front of you, right? It's not just a fictional person. It is an embodied AI that you can probably touch. You don't have to. Again, the definition that I presented to you earlier did say embodied or virtual. But at least it seems more real than a fictional character in a way. So now we're going to talk about the different types of social robots, because again, social robots can be multiple things. This categorization is a rough one, right? It's one that I have decided to do this way from my readings, but I would encourage you to go read other ways to categorize them. I like this one because it's just straightforward and easy, but it's a bit more complicated than that, really. So the first levels on the left, you can see voice assistants and AI avatars. Those ones are the virtual ones, non-embodied ones. Voice assistants are, for example, Google's OK Google, I guess the name is, Amazon's Alexa, Apple's Siri. All those, they are voice assistants. You talk to them and they answer to you. At this point, they're not embodied, or, I mean, I know Alexa can can be more or less embodied depending on with which tool you use it. But this gives you an idea, right? You can see what a voice assistant is. Now, an AI avatar, that's kind of the next level of everything, because AI can now create avatars that are uncannily human-like. And those avatars are AI powered. Therefore, they can be basically on-screen assistants, if we can say. That's how they're being used anyway. Most of those things at this point are used as assistant. And then you go on the other side, right? On the right side of your screen, you will see service robot, care robot, education robot, sex robot. Service robots are the one working in hotels. I know China has been trying it for a while. I'm sure that there's other places. If I remember well, Singapore has service robots. Those robots, they're here for information purpose. They, at this point, to my knowledge, don't have much more autonomy or power than just give information, answer questions. Then you go to the educational robots. Those ones are my personal favorite. They are meant most of the time to be with kids. And educational robots, you might see it as in classroom educational robot. There is some in France, they've been trying some of those to support kids to answer questions, to play educational games. But they can also be for vulnerable populations or kids with needs, special needs. For example, kids on the autistic spectrum, because one of the main problematics of the autistic spectrum is communication. And educational robots can actually be of support to the kids because they are predictable. And yeah, anyway, there is a good few examples out there of educational robots for autistic kids that help them be a bit more social. This is interesting. Then you have the care robots. I mean, with COVID lately, we've heard probably a bit more about those. And the care robots can be used in multiple ways. They can be there to help patients, but they can be there, apologies, to support carers. And this is, in my opinion, a really interesting future ahead of us. Of course, it needs more research, it needs more ethics embedded, and it needs to be really well thought through. But care robots seem to have a bright future if they're not having it yet. A few examples of how you can use them. For example, during COVID, was still in there, but I would say previously, when COVID was a bit harsher in some specific hospitals, robots could go into the patient's room and have the doctor on the screen. So basically be an embodiment of the doctor that was in another room to discuss with the patient, so that you would, avoid contact, since in a pandemic, that's kind of what you're trying to avoid, right? As spreading through contact. And this showed to be quite well accepted. It's not an enormous amount of work the robot is doing, but this is already helping, You also have the idea of having care robots to support, physically support nurses. This could be interesting. Nurses and helpers in general, carers in general, have a tendency in their work to have to support physically patients, literally lift them up or keep them up. Maybe a robot could be of good help to get a bit of that weight off, still with supervision, of course, obviously, but we're going to talk about that a bit later when we talk about ethics. Anyway, care robots can be amazing. The final one I want to talk about, and my favorite one, personal favorite, is Paro. I don't have a picture of it right here, but you can look it up on the internet. Paro is P-A-R-O, and it's a little baby white seal, and it is extremely cute. And it's meant to just be an animal, a fake animal, basically. And it has been used and tested with people with dementia, and this helped them a lot with anxiety. Basically, you touch it and it reacts. It has sensors everywhere. It can be happy, it can be unhappy. It's like a pet that doesn't need to be fed, nor to sleep, nor anything. When you don't have the option of animal therapy, this can be a great, great choice. And that's what has been tested a lot in Japan. And personally, I would recommend it. This, in my opinion, is an amazing thing for people suffering from anxiety. In this context, it was dementia patients. But yeah, anyway, and the final level, I would say, of interaction would be sex robots. This is a topic that probably in the public eye is not so much discussed, but I think it needs to be, and it needs to be studied more than discussed, really. In my opinion, we should go and really try and get data, because there's a lot of opinions out there, but to my knowledge, there is no empirical research with data being used. There's a lot of opinions around those. I don't think it is extremely relevant to cite them here, but I want you to be aware that they exist and that it's a really interesting topic. So now that, apologies, I'm going to move my camera right here so you can see the title. Now that we're aware of the different types of robots and what they are, we can start talking about the consequences of interacting with them. What can happen to the human? Again, here I want to highlight the can happen. I'm not saying this is a systematical thing. It's probabilities, right? So we need to keep in mind that probabilities are not 100%. They are, let's say, most of the time, or a hypothesis. So the first thing that could probably happen, I'm moving my camera again, right here, my video again. The first thing, the first level would be the Eliza effect. The Eliza effect is a really fun story. Eliza was a pioneer conversational AI built and created at the MIT AI lab between 1964 and 1966 by Joseph Weizenbaum. So can you imagine in the 60s, starting having an AI already, an AI that converses, that has discussions with people. That, I mean, this is amazing. Anyway, this Eliza was meant to be built as a therapist. This is interesting as well, because now you see why it had to be answering, right? It had to be really into the relationship or act like it. And the story is that Weizenbaum assistant used to test Eliza. So she would go and speak with Eliza. And at some point, she asked Joseph Weizenbaum to leave the office. And he was a bit confused. He's like, why? And the assistant told him really simply that she wanted to have privacy with Eliza. And Joseph Weizenbaum, that created Eliza, was really interested by this. He was asking, but why specifically? I mean, this is an AI, are you aware? But the assistant was explaining to him that as much as she's aware it's an AI, they're still having a private, personal conversation. Remember, Eliza was built to be therapist-like. And when really what it was doing, or what she was doing, because at this point we can maybe personalize her, what she was doing was taking the words from your question or from your answer and turning them into a question. So if you were to say, hi, Eliza, how are you? She would answer, hi, I'm fine, thank you. How are you? And then you would say, oh, I'm a bit tired. She, okay, why are you tired? And then you would keep going, oh, you know, work, and oh, what's happening at work? So you see how Eliza was working. It was really, yeah, I mean, it's a bit obnoxious to say that, but maybe a bit easy, if we can say today. I'm not sure it would work that well because we're way more used to computers. But at the time, this was something enormous. Anyway, you can imagine the conversation between Eliza and the assistant of Joseph Weizenbaum. And this idea that the assistant kind of brought up the first time and then kept coming up later on, that Eliza was perceived as understanding the conversation and being really involved in this conversation. This has been called the Eliza Effect. And it's defined as assigning understanding and reasoning skills to program. So I think this is a really interesting effect. This is kind of our first level of consequences. Users of Eliza seem to perceive it as understanding and caring for their conversation, right? This is a quote that I took out of a research. You can get the references a bit later on. Anyway, what happens after the Eliza effect then? What's the next level, if we can say? It would be anthropomorphism and zoomorphism. Anthropomorphism, I'm going to guess that a lot of you have heard this term before. It is the natural and automatic tendency of humans to recognize humanoid traits in non-human agents. A lot of big words to say, yeah, we recognize human stuff in stuff, literally. So when you have a robot that looks a bit humanoid, this would be even easier, but it can be a simple trait. I mean, Alexa, Siri, they don't have an embodied form, right? And they talk. This is human-like. So we go back to our first definition of social robots. We said human-like attributes. Well, this is what anthropomorphism is all about, is that we recognize human-like attributes in non-human agents. On the left, I put a little picture of R2-D2 from Star Wars. And I'm sure a lot of you can, well, know, let's say, this character that basically bips away. He just boop, beep, boop, boop, boop. That's R2-D2. But we still do recognize some human-like traits in this little robot, not because of the physics of it, because obviously it looks more like a pet, and we'll get to zoomorphism right after. But just because the tone that it uses, the tone of voice is really a human attribute as well. And we anthropomorphize it. So this is just a good example. The second level then, zoomorphism, is basically the same, but with animal traits. So if we don't recognize human-like traits, we will recognize animal traits. Again, you will have robots that are meant to look like animals, but then you have those that they're meant to just be, you know. They don't have a design that is specifically to be like animals, but we will still recognize animal-like traits in them. R2-D2 again, I think could be a good example. It depends. It's in the eyes of the viewer, right? So it depends how you perceive it. But I do perceive R2-D2 more like a cat than anything else. It's not about the design; it's about the behavior. Really independent, a lot of character. But that's my personal zoomorphism of R2-D2. Anyway, I'm guessing you got the point now of anthropomorphism, zoomorphism. So let's get to the next slide. I'll let you watch this video. If you don't have this, then it's fine. I just want you to watch it and really connect with how you're feeling about this. You'll see what happens in a second. All right. So I'm going to guess that some of you at some point started to feel a bit uncomfortable, especially when the human came in and started to pull the robot. And yeah, I don't personally, I do feel uncomfortable when I see this, because I see something a bit abusive in the behavior, right? He stops the robot, then he pulls the robot, closes the door on the robot. Anyway, a lot of things that if you were to do to an animal would be considered abuse. And interestingly enough, this robot from Boston Dynamics looks like a dog, right? This is full-on zoomorphism happening right there. This made me feel uncomfortable. Why? Well, this is empathy. And I hear a few of you already telling me you cannot have emotional empathy towards a robot. The empathy is more than simply emotions. Empathy has 3 levels, as explained on this slide. Empathy can be cognitive, emotional, or motivational, or all 3, or they're just 2, whatever, but there's 3 different types, there are 3 different levels in a way. The first level, which is the one involved in the reaction you might have had from this video, is the cognitive empathy. It's about taking a person's or things perspective or perception. So basically you're just trying to your brain, sorry, not maybe not consciously, is trying to perceive what's happening to that thing or person as if you were it. And that's just cognition. It's not about emotions. It's just about trying to figure this one out, like what's happening exactly, what is it okay? And then you get to the emotional level, which you don't have to get to, right? Again, this is a second level. The emotional level is about understanding feelings and mirroring them. If you have a friend who's crying, someone you're close to who's crying, most probably you will know what I'm talking about. You can see this person and you're feeling, you have this something negative, right? You feel bad, and that's emotional empathy, even though nothing happened to you, it's just your friend crying and you feel terrible about it. And then motivational, taking the friend example again, motivational empathy is about to act. How do you act to ease this person's pain? So when it's a friend, it's quite easy to get to this motivational empathy level, even though you don't have to. Again, most of the context of the everyday life might not lead you to motivational empathy, but cognitive empathy would probably be the first level for everyone, which is what happened to the robot, and then maybe other levels. I personally love robots, therefore, I would actually try and step in to stop this from happening. So this would lead me to motivational empathy. But again, this is a personal thing. Another impact of the interaction and the relationship with robots is trust. When we talk about trust, a lot of people imagine something really more personal than can be. Again, here I talk about trusts, multiple ones. Cognitive trust and emotional trust are not the same thing. Cognitive trust is the really simple, I trust it will work. It is about the reliability of the tool. So when you buy a robot, you're going to expect it to do what you bought it to do. It's really easy. I'm thinking about, for example, the iBots. They're not social robots. They're simple robots that are the vacuum robots, right? So iBot is one brand amongst others. Those little iBot, you will buy them, put them in the corner and expect them to go vacuum when you press the button and to go back to its base to get charged. Well, this is cognitive trust. It is just rational. And if your tool is reliable, well, there you go. The cognitive trust goes up. The different factors that are involved in cognitive trust are transparency, so you know how the robot works, reliability, again, task characteristics, it is there to do one thing and it's going to do it, or multiple things, but it's going to do it. And immediacy behavior. When I press that button on the little iBot, I'm expecting it to go vacuum now, not in 10 minutes, not in 15 minutes. So this is cognitive trust. Basically, the tool's going to work the way it's supposed to work. And then you get to emotional trust. So emotional trust is a bit more tricky because it's not rational. And it's really personal to every person, to every individual, to develop it or not. It is irrational and it grows through affection. A big word. When we talk about robots, remember the context here, we're talking about social robots. Irrational and growth through affection. One of the major points is tangibility. You can tangibly perceive your robot, whether it's embodied or not. It's present, right? Second point is anthropomorphism or zoomorphism. So if you recognize in your robot human or animal-like traits, you might have a tendency to grow emotional trust towards it. And the last point is immediacy behavior. Again, if I have a little social robot on my hands and I ask it, I don't know, for example, to answer my question, I'm going to expect of it to answer it now and not in 15 minutes, you know what I mean? So emotional trust is the second level of trust, if we can say. It's something that might happen with social robots. That's basically what social robots are aiming for when they aim for a relationship. And it is interesting. But is it a problem? We'll talk about that just a bit later. And we get to this point now of ethical questions. So many questions, right? I could spend a full seminar of hours talking about this, about the different ethical questions and arguments, pro and cons and whatever, on social robots and their use and the different things that need to be implemented in social robots. But here I want to talk about risks and opportunities. and trade-offs, which is a big keyword in ethics. Where do we put the trade-off? Where do we put the balance for just specific points? Because I think those are, in my opinion, again, just my opinion, the biggest questions and the questions we need to answer now, and not the ones we need to answer in 10 years when it's a bit too late. Especially, I'm personally a European, and therefore most of you might be aware of the GDPR, the General Regulation on Data. So here we're a bit tricky on data sharing and data privacy. And I think it's interesting to talk about this on a bigger scale, right? So our first trade-off that we need to consider is assistance versus dependence. What is dependence? If we're going to talk about this, we need to understand exactly what we mean, because it can mean a lot of things: dependence to substance, dependence to people, etc. So here is the definition I'm using from the APA dictionary, APA standing for American Psychological Association dictionary. Dependence, a state in which assistance from others is expected or actively sought for emotional protection, security, or daily care. This could fit for a robot, right? If you think about it, let's talk about care robots again, and aging populations, for example, vulnerable populations. They could be seeking the help of a robot for protection, security, or daily care for sure. So emotional as well. This is kind of the trait of social robots, isn't it? Is that they're emotional, they show to be emotional. Again, not against it. I personally think that there is a trade-off to be sought here. And so the concern here is the loss of autonomy. When we talk about autonomy, we're talking about a person's autonomy. So a robot could take away some or could get back some. A simple example in the context of care robot, again, because this applies probably more to care robots. When a robot goes to check someone's temperature, and maybe someone's hurting scale, if we can say, so how much do you hurt on a scale from 0 to 10? A robot could do that. So gets all this data from a patient and then goes back to the nurse with this data. Well, this is giving back autonomy to the nurse, because the nurse, even though would probably have to supervise the robot, would gain that time back by not doing this task and being able to do another one at the same time. So that's autonomy back in a way. Now, in the context of a patient that has a care robot that is there to support their daily care, for example, it would give them back autonomy if it was the trade-off between having a care robot at home or being in a hospice. But maybe if there is emotional trust between the patient and the robot, or just the patient towards the robot, really, because again, robots cannot feel, therefore cannot really trust either. And the patient is part of a vulnerable population. Let's imagine my patient now has to pay for an update, and my robot is not going to work unless it gets updated. What should the patient do? I mean, you're removing some autonomy right here. Yes, of course, you're giving a choice, but choice is the robot will basically die, if we can say. Remember, parasocial relationships can bring to grief. Or you have to pay. I mean, this is a big issue. You're kind of imposing this. This is a question of autonomy. Another question of autonomy is, taking again this example of my patient being probably in the really senior area of age, having the choice between staying at home with a care robot that can make sure that they don't fall, or if they fall, it's reported, that they take their pills every day, that kind of thing. Or go to a hospice. So you have those two choices. Actually, the robot will bring back some autonomy, because instead of being in a hospital, then this patient can still stay at home and have their own life. Anyway, you see where the trade-off stands. So the question is, where do we put the balance? Where do we put the, where do we put the limits of this assistance? I do believe it's a case-by-case scenario, but that's just my personal opinion. And I do love the idea of care robots helping people to stay in the place they want to be in for longer, for example, at home. That's my personal opinion, though, again. Another big point, deception versus transparency. Big words. Deception is when you hide something, when you lie, but it's not a point blank lie. It's more about it's a white lie, let's say. You're being deceiving. You are showing something that's not there, but you're never saying, oh, it's there. In the context of social robot, that would most probably be their emotions. But let's talk about something else in the relationship itself and talk about data privacy. Social robots, the embodied ones, will collect data that go as far as someone's house layout, right? Because a robot, if it moves around the house, will need to know where furniture is, etc., which room it's in, that kind of things, and it will record it most probably so that it doesn't have to relearn it every day. I'm not sure this is going to be done every time, but that's my assumption. So let's assume that this robot will know how the house is laid out. Let's now assume that my robot will know when I'm home and not. I've seen a lot of little social robots lately offering to be alarm systems. This would mean that the robot is aware when you're home and not. I'm going to guess that most probably you'll have geolocalization with the IP address. And I'm pretty sure that just this, let's not even talk about conversations and what all the robot can not just hear, but also record with a purpose to get better at conversing, obviously. But if we're not even just talking about that, all those data already about geolocalization, how is the house laid out, and when people are home and not, what are the different, let's say, habits of the people in the house. This can already be big, important data for hackers that maybe are looking into robbing someone's blind, you know? This is an important thing to take into account. And when you have a relationship with your robot and you start developing emotional trust with your robot, you might forget, right? You might forget that it's a robot. You might forget that it is recording data. You might even forget how much data it's recording. And if you start talking with it, you might start talking with it like it's a friend, and therefore divulge a lot of information that you wouldn't divulge normally to, let's say, the first person coming. This can be a not problem, or this can be a problem, really, if someone hacks. So here we're talking about cybersecurity as well, but data is not just about hacking, right? It's about sharing this data. So how do we deal with that? You're going to tell me GDPR, and probably GDPR is the first step. I would agree with that. But we need to go a bit further than simply GDPR, because here we're dealing with the situation where people will probably, again, psychology is about statistics, probably forget that this is recording all data. So transparency might be a solution. This brings a new issue. When you say transparency as a solution, it's about having the robot give a few more feedbacks as being the robot. For example, I'm having a conversation with my robot and I'm saying, oh, hi, yeah, I'm going to be home tomorrow at 10. Can you please turn on the lights in the garden tomorrow at 10? And my robot just records it and is like, okay, so good. And then my robot asks me, because it's a conversational AI, because it's a social robot, asks me, oh, what are you going to do tomorrow? And I'm starting explaining, oh, you know, I'll go out with friends and this friend, and maybe I'll even name my friend. And then maybe I'll talk about them a bit more with my robot. All this information is because I forgot it's a robot. could be shared on a cloud. And now my robot comes in and says, oh, please do remember that I am recording this data. Do you want me to share them or not? This would be transparency, even though this would be a bit hard to implement, right? But this could be a first way of thinking of solutions for this. So now the question is, how much information should we give people regarding the AI system itself? Because if you start talking about transparency, you will start talking about all the explaining how the system works itself, or do you just want to know the basics of how your AI works or how your robot reacts? It's a bit complicated. We need to work a bit more on the explainability per person in a way. So not giving all the same info to everyone, because not everyone is interested nor wants to know all those things, but giving the opportunity to know those things. And I think this fits really well with the GDPR, which is about as well giving enlightened consent. But to do that, you need to know where your data are going. This is about transparency and what's being done with them, obviously. So here, the trade-off would be between balance. Sorry, it would be a balance between control and will of use for the transparency. How much can you control the data that you're giving, and how much is it going to change the use of your robot? If I say to my robots, I want you to record nothing, my robot will probably not be personalizing its interaction with me more, but I want it to be really personal to me. And so therefore I need to agree on some data being recorded. So you see how another trade-off comes in. And when you talk about transparency, you need to see which characteristic do your user have, how much do they want to know, how much should they know, and how do you remind people of all this? So you see it's a bit of a complicated question, but I think it's interesting for everyone to realize that you will have to hand on your data in an EU setting, thanks to GDPR. But where and how do we implement that with robots so that it's really obvious to the user that they can get their data removed, and that they can also decide which data are being used or not, which one are necessary, which one are not, that kind of things, you know. Anyway, a big question, a big topic, and the last one, which is a really, let's say, a hot topic, if we can say, in the field, is how relationships with robot might be changing human to human or human to animal relationships. That is a really fun topic, because it is a lot linked to moral panic, which is something we can see in other settings, for example, video games, or historically, in a lot of different contexts. When journals started to be delivered at home, people had a moral panic at some point, saying that it was going to stop the relationship between humans at the table. Because, you know, now people were going to read the journal at the table. So, you know, they're not going to interact. And I think this is a bit of the moral panic taking over as soon as we start talking about human to human and human to animal relationships in regards to human to robot interactions. It is still a really interesting and important topic, and it needs to be studied and it needs to be discussed. But I think we all have to take the measure of this discussion and not go overboard because we're afraid of something thanks to science fiction. I do love science fiction movie, but let's be honest, they did not help us with this reflection, or at least not in the right way, if we can say, not in the balanced way. So the first assumption, the first thing that we need to accept in a way, is that a robot will look like humans or animals, thanks to anthropomorphism, zoomorphism, or we will recognize them as such most of the time. So our relationship with them might indeed impact our relationship to other humans or other animals because they look like them. So might this relationship dehumanize our relationship with each other? Again, here I'm talking about moral panic, and interestingly enough, I would invite you to look into Kate Darling's latest book, The New Breed, where she talks about how social robots might actually just be the new animals in a way. And she explains it through an entire book, right? So it's a bit more thorough than what I'm giving you here. And in the book, she mentions that when animals that used to be basically tools, ended up being pets, a moral panic occurred again. So you see how moral panics are a thing that as humans, as society keeps doing. A second point is may reduce our pro-social skills, especially in the context of violence or abuse towards robots, and if that becomes a norm. This is a really good question. It was Kant that was saying that you see the value of a society by the way they treat their animals. Well, maybe it might be the same for humans, right? And robots. You might see the value of a society by the way they treat their robots. But anyway, will that impact our human to human or human to animal relationship if we do agree to some level of violence towards robots? I honestly don't know, and I cannot tell you yes or no because I don't have data to support this claim. My opinion, which is based again on Kate Darling's book, really, really good book, definitely recommend it, is that it will depend on personal perspective, right? I would personally, and that again is a personal opinion, I would invite you to think about it for yourself, right? My personal opinion is that violence is never okay. But this is, again, my views. Therefore, in the context of robots, violence should never be okay either. It's not about the robot, really. It's about myself and my values. And that's what Kate Darling is presenting in her books as well. It is that the first animal rights came up not for the animals, but for the humans. It was there to kind of, how can I say that, valorize the human in the relationship and say it's for the humans that we need to put those laws down. It's because being violent is not great. And it's not because the animal might be hurt. So this is a really interesting, I think, really a really interesting take on this. Now, to finish, I would like to talk about the options that are being discussed right now in regards to social robots and relationships. How do we prevent harm in general, and how, or what do we do about this, whether it is for this question or the other ones? But especially for the abuse and violence question, I think this is extremely relevant. There is two major takes, two directions, as always, the let's wait and see situation, which is, or let's wait and let's put the robots out in society and let's make a decision once we see the consequences of such. And the other one that is kind of the extreme opposite, that is to say, let's do like for the animals and come up with robots' rights. I think it's up to you to make your own decision and to go maybe read a bit more on this if you're interested. If you Google robots' right, you will find some really interesting things. I'm thinking of a specific book that is called Robots' Right. I would recommend as well. Those are at this point a lot of questions with not a lot of answers. And I would like to conclude by saying that we need more research in general to answer those questions. We need more evidence-based research. When I talk about that, obviously, I'm talking about experimenting. I'm talking in the, in the frame of the law, in the frame of ethics, as always, but really having some strong data that can back our argumentations and our implementations. I hope that this was not too long and that this was interesting enough for all of you. I hope you enjoyed it. Please don't hesitate to contact me if you want to talk about this a bit further, or if you have any questions. I'm wishing you a great day or evening. And yes, please don't hesitate to reach out to me. Bye.